This is the New Testament periodic table. Yes, there is a whole Bible periodic table. But we're focusing on the New Testament. Each element is a book of the New Testament. It contains the book symbol, the name of the book, and the word count. Why add the word count? The word count is the best measure of what size the book actually is. You could go by chapter count. But not all chapters are created equal. The shortest chapter in the Bible is Psalm 117 with 2 verses and just over 30 words. The longest chapter in the Bible is Psalm 119 with 176 verses and over 2,400 words. Besides, Mark, Romans, and 1 Corinthians all have 16 chapters, and they all differ in actual length. This is the same problem with counting verses. The longest verse in the Bible is Esther 8, verse 9, with 90 words. While the shortest verse in the Old Testament is Job 3, verse 2. He said. And the shortest verse in the New Testament is John 11, verse 35. Jesus wept. And why put word count on the chart in the first place? We'll get to that in a bit. For now, here's the New Testament periodic table. And the New Testament is structured in this way. We have the Gospels, the good news books that are considered the biography of the life and times of Jesus on earth. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We have a history book in Acts of the Apostles, which tells us of the life and times of the origins of Christianity itself. And we have end times prophecy in the book of Revelation. In between are all the letters, or epistles. We have one letter from James, the brother of Jesus, also known as James the Just. One from Jude, understood to be the half-brother of Jesus, mentioned in Matthew 13 verse 55. We have 2 letters from St. Peter. We have 3 letters from the Apostle John, who also wrote Revelation. And 1 letter named Hebrews whose authorship is not agreed upon. It could be Paul, it could be Barnabas, it could be Luke, or even Priscilla. The rest of the letters are attributed to the Apostle Paul. Paul's letters are almost half of the New Testament and about 2/3 of all the epistles. Of the Pauline letters, 4 are written to specific people. These are known as the pastoral epistles. 2 letters to Timothy, 1 to Titus, and another to Philemon. The other 9 are written to churches. 1 epistle to the church in the city of Rome. 2 epistles to the church in Corinth. We'll be studying part of the first this week. 1 to the churches in the province of Galatia. 1 to the church in Ephesus. 1 to the church in Philippi. 1 to the church in Colossae. And 2 to the church in Thessalonica. Now, this is where that word count comes into play. You notice anything about that word count? What happens to the size of Paul's epistles as the Bible progresses? You see, when the New Testament was canonized in the late 300s, Paul's epistles were added by size, from largest to smallest. But that's not in the order in which they were historically written. That's just the way they were organized in the Bible. And it makes sense when you consider they weren't organizing the Bible for archaeological purposes, but for theological ones. The books with more information on Christian purpose, faith, life, etc., came first. Neither the geography of the church it was written to or the order in which they were written were the priority. The chronological order looks something more like this. And it follows the path of Paul's ministry and the path of his multiple missionary journeys, where Paul preached and established new churches. Often Paul would be ministering at one place and write letters to another that he had ministered to before, responding to requests or new information and reports he received about those churches. We can break down the chronological order based on Paul's missionary journeys. Paul and Barnabas were called for his first missionary journey. They went to the island of Cyprus, Barnabas's homeland, and then traveling north into what is modern central Turkey, the Roman province of Galatia, where they started churches in Antioch Pisidia, Iconium, Lystra, and Derbe. Galatians was written to the churches of Galatia after Paul established those churches. There are 3 main scholarly theories as to the specifics of where and when Galatians was penned. But for the sake of brevity, Galatians is the first epistle. Paul's second missionary journey, this time with Silas and Timothy. Paul revisited the churches in Galatia. Then on to Troas. Then Paul preached in 5 cities in Greece, including Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea, Athens, and Corinth. On that journey, during an 18-month stay in Corinth, Paul wrote 1st and 2nd letters to the church at Thessalonica. On Paul's third missionary journey, he traveled through Galatia to the Roman province of Asia Minor, western modern Turkey, ministering in Ephesus for 3 years. 3 letters were written during this period: 1 Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, and Romans. Following his third missionary journey, Paul returned to Jerusalem. Due to many factors, Paul was arrested by the Romans and placed in protective custody or house arrest. From Jerusalem, he was taken to Caesarea for 2 years and then to Rome for 2 years. Each stop Paul was under house arrest and awaiting trial. While under house arrest in Rome, Paul wrote what's known as the prison epistles: Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon. At some point Paul was released, only to be later arrested again and taken back to Rome. This last time wasn't house arrest, but actual prison. From his imprisonment, Paul wrote, or dictated, 3 epistles to individuals. They are known as the pastoral letters. 1 Timothy, to Timothy, in Ephesus. Titus, to Titus, on the island of Crete. And 2 Timothy to Timothy, which was written during the final days of Paul's life. While in prison, Paul wouldn't necessarily have written the letters himself, but he likely had church members visit, and he would have had someone act as an amanuensis or a grammateus, as he dictated his letters to them. Both words meaning scribe or secretary. This week, we are studying Paul's first letter to the Corinthians. One important aspect to understand Corinthians and Corinth is understanding its geography. For reference, here is the Mediterranean Sea. This is Spain, France, Egypt, Italy, the city of Rome, Israel, the city of Jerusalem. The space in this crescent moon shape is essentially Greece. Tucked inside the center of Greece is Corinth. Zooming further in on Greece. Corinth lies about 42 miles due west of Athens, Greece. If you're curious, it's about 50 to 55 miles by road. Zooming in again. The area of and around Corinth is what's called an isthmus. An isthmus is a narrow strip of land bordered by water on both sides and connecting 2 larger land masses. The Isthmus of Corinth holds the Gulf of Corinth to the north and the Saronic Gulf to the south. The Attic Peninsula sits to the northeast. The Peloponnese Peninsula sits to the southwest. The modern-day isthmus holds a 3.94-mile-long canal, called, of course, the Corinth Canal. It connects the 2 gulfs via water, allowing ships to travel through the isthmus. It was finished in 1893. Before that point, transporting goods was much harder. Cargo boats in Paul's time were actually transported by land over an ancient paved trackway known as the Dialgos. Ships were unloaded, and thousands of slaves would drag them across land while the cargo was transported separately. Socially and politically speaking, Corinth was a commercial powerhouse. Controlling 2 ports, Lycaon, to the Gulf of Corinth, and Cenchreae, to the Saronic Gulf, plus the Dialgos, made it a hub of trade between East and West. Rome conquered Corinth in 146 BC, so in Paul's time, it was both Roman and Greek in culture. In Corinth, in addition to Romans and Greeks, you'd find Jews, Egyptians, and traders from across the Mediterranean. As a busy port town with plenty of sailors and money, Corinth certainly had its share of taverns, brothels, and revelry. In fact, Corinth had a reputation in the Greek world for luxury and vice. The verb, to Corinthianize, in Greek, Korinthiazomai, meant to live licentiously. Temples and cults were all over Corinth. There was worship of Aphrodite, Poseidon, Apollo, Asclepius, the imperial cult, and various Eastern mystery religions like Isis. Thus, Paul was trying to establish and maintain a foothold of Christianity in a social structure that was deeply worldly, deeply pagan, and rooted in immorality and sin.